Welcome to Forbidden History, the podcast-style channel where we explore the darkest corners of history and mythology. Everything we share is carefully researched and fact-checked, so you get the real history. If you enjoyed learning about the shocking, strange, and forgotten parts of the past, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join the discussion in the comments. In the early 14th century, Europe was brought to its knees by one of the most devastating food crises in its history. From 1315 to 1317, relentless rains, flooding, and cold weather destroyed crops, drowned cattle, and left entire regions starving. This event, remembered as the Great Famine, killed millions and shook the foundations of medieval society. Chroniclers of the time recorded horrors beyond imagination. Desperate parents abandoning their children, villages torn apart by hunger, and even cases of cannibalism. In an age when religion defined every part of life, when sin and salvation were the central concerns of ordinary people, starvation pushed men and women to break the ultimate taboo: to eat human flesh. The Great Famine began with weather. In the spring of 1315, heavy rains fell across northern Europe. They did not stop. Entire fields were flooded, crops rotted before they could ripen, and grain prices soared. Wheat, rye, and barley, the staples of the medieval diet, became scarce. Livestock drowned in the mud, hay could not be harvested, and even horses, vital for farming and transport, grew weak. Chroniclers wrote that in some years it rained almost every day. The cold was so severe that the Baltic Sea froze, blocking trade. The failure of crops in one year was tragic but survivable. The disaster was that the rains and floods continued into 1316 and 1317. For 3 long years, Europe was trapped in a spiral of hunger. Hunger quickly became famine. Ordinary families could not afford the soaring prices of bread and grain. Peasants ate what they could: dogs, cats, roots, grass, even bark stripped from trees. Many turned to acorns or horse meat. Some ground weeds into flour to make a bitter, poisonous bread. Death came not only from starvation but from the diseases that follow malnutrition. Dysentery, pneumonia, and other infections killed countless victims. It is estimated that between 10 and 25% of the population of Northern Europe perished during these years. The famine was not just a natural disaster, it revealed how fragile medieval society truly was. Local markets collapsed, merchants hoarded grain, and rulers struggled to maintain order. Criminal records show a surge in theft, looting, and violence as starving people raided mills, barns, and storehouses. Chroniclers describe mothers abandoning their children because they could no longer feed them, and children wandering the countryside in search of scraps. In monasteries, monks wrote of the people dying like flies. One French chronicle simply noted that the living could scarcely bury the dead. And then, in the darkest corners of these records come whispers of cannibalism. Medieval chroniclers rarely described it openly. The act was too horrifying, too shameful, but the hints are unmistakable. A chronicler from Flanders wrote that men devoured their own children. In Ireland, it was said that starving parents ate the flesh of the dead. In England, reports surfaced of corpses being dug from graves. Chroniclers claim that the bodies of criminals hanging on the gallows were gnawed by the famished. While some of these accounts may have been exaggerated, the sheer desperation of the time makes it clear that cannibalism did occur, at least in isolated extreme cases. When bread, meat, and even roots were gone, the dead became the last possible source of food. For medieval Christians, cannibalism was not only horrifying but spiritually damning. To eat human flesh was to step outside the bounds of humanity itself, to act more like beasts than men. And yet, the famine left people with a terrible choice: starve and die or break every law of God and nature to survive. In some cases, the line blurred further. In towns where public executions still took place, the bodies of the hanged sometimes disappeared overnight, carried away by desperate hands. Chroniclers noted that travelers feared ambushes, not for money, but for their bodies. Hunger made men into predators of their own kind. The famine also reshaped politics and society. Kings and lords found themselves powerless to feed their people. Edward II of England tried to regulate the price of grain, but failed. Philip V of France distributed charity, but it was never enough. The authority of rulers crumbled as their subjects starved. In some places, violence erupted against minorities as hungry mobs sought scapegoats. Rumors spread that Jews or witches had cursed the harvests, poisoning wells or calling down the rains. Starvation fueled fear, hatred, and persecution. The Great Famine finally ended around 1318, when weather conditions improved and harvests slowly recovered. But the scars remained. The generation that survived was physically stunted, weakened by years of malnutrition. Diseases spread more easily, and the population's resilience was broken. Many historians argue that the Great Famine paved the way for the even greater catastrophe of the Black Death just a few decades later. When the plague struck in 1347, Europe was still weakened from famine and poverty, making the death toll even worse. Looking back, the famine reveals both the fragility and the brutality of medieval life. A few bad harvests could plunge millions into chaos. Religion, law, and morality collapsed in the face of empty stomachs. The idea that ordinary farmers, mothers, and fathers might eat their own children is almost unthinkable to us today. And yet, for those trapped in the nightmare of 1315 to 1317, survival sometimes demanded the unthinkable. Cannibalism during the Great Famine may have been rare, but even the fact that it occurred at all shows the depths of desperation. The Great Famine is often overshadowed by the drama of the Black Death, but in many ways it was just as transformative. It exposed the weakness of medieval economies, the cruelty of hunger, and the terrifying limits of human endurance. For the peasants who lived through it, it was not a historical event. It was 3 years of constant fear, exhaustion, and hunger. Parents watching their children waste away, villages digging mass graves, and in some places the final horror of bodies consumed by their own neighbors. The story of cannibalism during the Great Famine is not just about starvation. It is about how thin the line is between civilization and desperation. When food disappears, so too does morality, law, and faith. For medieval Europe, the Great Famine was a lesson written in hunger and blood, that no matter how powerful kings or churches seemed, nature could strip them bare, leaving humanity at its most desperate and its most savage.